The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of July 19, 2026. The podcast that wants to turn this ship around. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's maturate the news of the bogus. So it's time to check out the new guy. Kevin M. Warsh is the new chairman of the Federal Reserve Board as of May 13. And I gotta give the guy some credit. He may not be as bad as the rest. Certainly not as bad as Janet Yellen or Bubbles Bernanke. Warsh is calling for a more focused central bank that isn't trying to moralize about what people do with their money or inject public policy into it. And more importantly, he's talking about getting a tight rein on inflation. And that's not even the best news. As we've covered often in the past, inflation is a tax, a transfer of wealth from the working class to the political class. In the past, it was really just libertarians and Austrian economists and Ron Paul who were pointing that out. But in this week's Senate Banking Committee questioning of Warsh, well, listen to what Chairman French Hill had to say at the very start.
There's no more punishing tax on American industry or on the hard-working, innovative citizens of our nation than inflation.
Wow! Music to my ears, Hill.
You've said recently that inflation is a choice. I want to echo this and say that debt and deficits are also a choice. For years, the Congress chooses unrestrained deficits and out-of-control debt and has repeatedly drafted the Fed into being an enabler. Both, in my view, have to stop.
This is absolutely correct. I just hope he fully understands this. It's important, so I'll explain it to you all again. If you haven't heard this, pay attention, and you'll know more about how this works than most politicians and even most economists. The reason they don't like the Fed to pull back on money creation is that it causes interest rates to go up. Friends and neighbors, it doesn't. I'll tell you what really causes interest rates to rise. According to projections, this year Congress will spend us into some $2 trillion of deficit. The way it does so is by selling bonds in the loanable funds market. Now, in the loanable funds market, supply and demand works the same way it always does, except the price is the interest rate. So this $2 trillion represents an enormous increase in the demand for loanable funds. That makes the interest rate go up. The Fed doesn't want that to happen, so it creates money and injects it into the loanable funds market, increasing the supply of loanable funds. That brings the interest rate back down, but of course it creates inflation. Now, if the Fed wants interest rates to stay the same, that means they have to meet the amount that Congress has increased the demand by. In other words, they'll have to create $2 trillion out of thin air. That is how deficit spending turns into inflation. And that's also why interest rates rise when the Fed pulls back on money printing. It's not the Fed increasing interest rates. Congress is doing that with all of that deficit spending. The Fed can only get it down again by creating money. Warsh didn't actually explain that, so it's unclear if he understands that, but he does at least understand that inflation is a tax.
All central bankers are going to make some share of mistakes, but when they make a mistake, they've got to call it out. Had that mistake been called out sooner, I don't believe we would have been burdened with this undue tax over the last 5 years.
Actually, we shouldn't have been burdened with it over the last 113 years. Seriously, every time sound money has been tried, it's worked wonderfully, whereas an inflationary monetary policy always leads to destruction.
The 63 months of inflation above target has been an unfair burden and has been a tax on the American people and businesses. We plan on getting rid of that tax.
It sounds great, right? No more inflation! Well, don't celebrate yet. That phrase, above target, is a detail that the devil is very much in. As confirmed throughout the questioning, the Fed's current target is 2%. So that's still a 2% tax on our future. And that compounds. If you consider a typical career from 18 to 65, that's 47 years, and a constant 2% inflation rate, that means the total tax rate on all of your earnings is 154%. It's not actually taken from you in dollars, but it's reflected in the price of everything you buy. But it does at least sound like a line in the sand. We can hope at any rate.
Presenting the greatest game this side of Yugoth. You are H.P. Lovecraft's cat, and your name is Nick. Right, we can't say that on a podcast. Well, anyway, that's the point. Your name is a joke, so now you are out for revenge. You become a Necronomicat. Using the Necronomicon, you come to the present day to buy a cat. That's a gun. For a cat. It's a fat cat. But the Necronomicon is treacherous, and it read in Lovecraft's monsters. Now, in a crumbling world, you must fight. Build your team, buy guns and armor, buy items of dubious legality, defeat the bosses of each level, then take Lovecraft down. Play Necronomicat. The link is at cat.bogosity.tv. Yeah, we're doing cat.bogosity.tv, not that other one. What, you want me to get kicked off the internet or something?
I'll have to admit, this is a story I didn't see coming. Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan is facing calls to be investigated for not recusing herself from Suncor v. Boulder County Commissioners. The case is about whether state and local governments can seek damages against fossil fuel companies because of their CO2 emissions. 8 years ago, Boulder County, the City of Boulder, and San Miguel County sued Suncor Energy and ExxonMobil, alleging that they knowingly contributed to climate change. But the companies argue that since climate change is a global issue, not a local one, federal law such as the Clean Air Act has jurisdiction, not state and local laws. Moreover, allowing state and local action on this would lead to conflicting policies on energy and emissions. There may be an action that is required by the feds, but that violates local law. That's a situation that cannot be allowed. Both the District Court and the 10th Circuit found for the local governments, rejecting the claims that federal common law governing interstate pollution preempts such lawsuits. But as the 10th Circuit acknowledged, this represents a circuit split with the 7th Circuit, albeit one that has already existed for years. So the Supreme Court granted certiorari and heard the case back in January on the questions, quote, whether federal law precludes state law claims seeking relief for injuries allegedly caused by the effects of interstate and international greenhouse gas emissions on the global climate. Now, a coalition of several conservative groups has sent a letter to leaders of the Senate Judiciary Committee to investigate whether Kagan violated ethics rules by participating in the case. They wrote, her irregular recusal practice in cases on which she has staked a position in public undermines confidence in the impartiality of the court. This would not occur were she to adhere to accepted ethics standards against adjudicating cases where her impartiality might reasonably be questioned. As such, we urge the Senate Judiciary Committee to swiftly investigate whether Justice Kagan has violated federal law and the court's accepted code of conduct. This is because of the foreword she wrote in the Federal Judicial Center's Reference Manual on Scientific Evidence, in which she wrote, the Reference Manual on Scientific Evidence exemplifies the benefits that can accrue from cooperation between those proficient in legal analysis and those expert in technical subjects. Judges, along with the lawyers who argue before them, will do their jobs better when they recognize what they can learn from the scientific community, and the law will become stronger as it further reflects sound science. It doesn't sound so bad, except that the manual is conclusory in a way that science isn't. Science is descriptive, not prescriptive, but the manual goes beyond mere education. At question is the section on climate change, which repeatedly cites legal polemics from lawyers actively litigating this very issue. Quote, This section was designed to persuade skeptical judges in state and local climate lawfare, authored by two individuals who advocate for and support that litigation, largely lifted word for word from an academic article the authors wrote alongside a plaintiff lawyer in many of those cases, and provided to that plaintiff lawyer for feedback prior to publication. Indeed, the reference guide itself was made possible by financial support from an entity that funds plaintiff lawyers in state and local climate lawfare. The letter cited several sources in support. A few weeks after the Supreme Court hearing the case, the FJC excised the section on climate science after numerous complaints from both Congress members and multiple state attorneys general. Quote, Justice Kagan failed to recuse when the court granted a petition for a writ of certiorari brought by Suncor and ExxonMobil. The case is likely to be heard during the court's October 2026 term, and it involves a challenge to a Colorado state tort judgment against oil and gas companies for their alleged contributions to climate change. They complained about Kagan's inconsistent history of recusing herself from cases where she really should have. Remember that justices are ethically required to do so when there's even an appearance of impropriety. Quote, if Justice Kagan will not take it upon herself to follow the law, which requires her recusal from any proceeding in which her impartiality might reasonably be questioned, the Senate Committee on the Judiciary must step in. The committee should investigate and hold hearings in order to uphold the public's substantial interest in ethical rigor from the justices on our nation's highest court. Other justices have recused themselves for far less. It's not about her opinion on climate change. It's about her supporting legal conclusions and public policy positions from people purporting to tell judges what they should do. They have the right to do that, absolutely, but a Supreme Court justice who's involved with that should recuse themselves from any such case. This isn't difficult. And this isn't even anything controversial. Justices have recused themselves in about 3% of cases. Owning a gun wouldn't stop a justice from hearing a Second Amendment case. Having an opinion about the Second Amendment shouldn't stop them. But if they support the NRA, they should recuse themselves. That's how this works. Now it just remains to be seen if the Judiciary Committee will do anything about it.
I'm brother Ezekiel, and I know how naughty thou hast been. So naughty, thou needst a VPN. Hide thy iniquity from prying eyes, and make sure the liturgical authorities remain ignorant. Take thy browser to bpn.bogosity.tv to get BoxPN. At $6.36 a month, a price only the most penurious would balk at, thou shalt have unlimited high-speed connections to servers all over the globe. And they don't log connections. Thy privacy is assured. That should please you sinners. Just remember, the Lord sees all. When traveling, make it look like thou art still home. At home, ensure the elders at your ISP don't take out their judgment with traffic shaping and DMCA notices. Up to 5 devices can connect at once, almost one for every deadly sin. Keep thy sins private. Go to bpn.bogosity.tv.
We covered the Jack Smith saga as it unfolded. He was the not a real prosecutor who tried to prosecute Trump twice leading up to the 2024 election in an attempt to invalidate him as a candidate. Obviously, it backfired. So in December of last year, Smith sat down for questioning by the House Judiciary Committee. One of the issues, as we covered at the time, was that he was spying on Congress members, conspiring with NARA to get the metadata of their cell phone records. 44 members of Congress got swept up into this unconstitutional probe into Donald Trump and his associates. He and his masters were trying to subvert the election, control the outcome, and even imprison their political opponents. And they were grasping around for any straws they could find to do that. At the time, Smith said he wasn't getting the content of the calls and text messages. Remember, this testimony is under oath.
Toll records were sought for historical telephone routing information, collected after calls had taken place, identifying the incoming and outgoing call numbers, the time of the calls and their duration. Toll records do not include the content of calls.
The toll records that you requested from the senators, did they include the content of the phone calls?
No.
The records that you requested, the toll records from the members of Congress, include the content of text messages?
No.
Can you explain for us on the record what information generally is included in a toll records request?
Sure. Again, my understanding from a prosecutor's perspective is it is non-content information. It's generally about when the call started, when the call stopped. That would include, obviously, the duration of the call and who the call is to and who the call is from. That's the basic information that you want to get from a toll records subpoena.
When you were requesting toll records, did it mean that DOJ or FBI was conducting surveillance on members of Congress?
No.
When you were collecting toll records, did it mean that DOJ or FBI would be able to wiretap phone calls made by members of Congress?
No.
Turns out that was an outright lie. The Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations has now released documentation demonstrating positively that Smith did indeed get the content of text messages. From information collected based on whistleblower disclosures, they found that Smith and his team circumvented their own filter review process, which was in place to keep privileged materials from being swept up in a criminal investigation. Grassley said, quote, Jack Smith's criminal investigation of President Trump was a runaway train that had no brakes. Based on the information that's been produced to me and Senator Johnson, Biden, DOJ, and FBI investigators apparently ignored their own routine investigative protocols to obtain and review work-related messages from me and dozens of my Republican and Democrat colleagues who were outside the scope of the government's investigation. I hope my Democrat colleagues, several of whom had their own texts swept up, finally put partisanship aside and recognize the severity of these actions. Smith's team ran roughshod over the Constitution even after repeated warnings. Jack Smith has answering to do, and I intend to have him before the Senate Judiciary Committee in the coming months to hold him accountable. Investigation Subcommittee Chairman Ron Johnson said, quote, This is yet another grotesque example of the Biden administration's weaponization of the Justice Department. Jack Smith's team acted with impunity as they disregarded their own protocols to obtain and access White House text messages, including messages to and from 44 members of Congress. At this point, no one should be shocked by Jack Smith's recklessness and blatant abuse of power, but they should be outraged. Included in the public release are 90 pages of records, including emails, slides, and tables showing that Smith and his team knowingly engaged in this conduct, and that Smith would have been well aware that his answers in December were false. Josh Hawley tweeted, "Looks like perjury," and that everyone involved needs to be prosecuted. Rand Paul tweeted, Jack Smith swore under oath that he didn't spy on text messages belonging to members of Congress. New evidence confirms he spied on dozens of members of Congress, myself included. This was a blatant abuse of power and exactly what our founders warned about. Mike Davis tweeted, Jack Smith spied on 44 members of Congress. He then sat before Congress and lied under oath. This is perjury, obstruction, and a federal crime. Chuck Grassley proved it. Todd Blanche confirmed it. Jack, the dam is breaking. You are a criminal and are going to prison. It is so bad, even Dick Blumenthal says you are an issue. Lawyer up, buddy. It looks like you are going to be in a jumpsuit real soon. And this time, there is no Democrat to pardon you. Folks, I don't see how it gets any more blatant than this. Regardless of whether or not you think Jack had a case or not, or even regardless of whether you think he was right to do it, the fact is, he did it, and then he lied to Congress about it. You or I did that, we'd be charged with perjury. Democrats kept saying, no one is above the law. Time to see if they meant it. I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to give them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now it's time to decolorate this week's
biggest Bogon Emitter!
And this week it goes to WellLink Health Alliance for more anti-opioid disinformation. They're an association covering 37 hospitals and are one of the driving forces behind anti-opioid policies. If you've gone to the hospital recently and they refuse to give you painkillers and gave you Tylenol instead, these guys might be a big part of the reason why. Your reminder that Tylenol isn't a painkiller and doesn't perform any better than placebos for pain. These comments are part of their NEO opioid education series, The Future of Pain Management, Cutting-Edge Non-Opioid Solutions. This series is supported by the CDC's Overdose Data to Action Grant. Your tax dollars at work. Shout out to the Doctor Patient Forum for cluing me in on this one. I'll link to their Patreon in the show notes. This clip features Dawn Harris, Senior Medical Science Liaison at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Yeah, they're basically in bed with Vertex. They're listed as a corporate sponsor, and the slides are copyright 2025 Vertex Pharmaceuticals Incorporated. By the way, Vertex has patented the non-opioid painkiller Jernavix. Jernavix, or suzetrigine, is a novel new class of painkiller that works on sodium channels. It can be effective for moderate acute pain when compared to placebo, and works almost as well as the weaker opioids such as hydrocodone. It's not a replacement for anything stronger. And it's not approved for chronic pain, and phase 2 trials so far haven't separated it from placebo. Harris said in the presentation,
despite very good current controls from the CDC, there still is abuse of prescription opioids. It still does result in opioid-related mortality.
Oh yes, it's all about the prescriptions. Let's just ignore the black market, where the real deaths are occurring.
According to CDC reports, overdose deaths from prescription opioids have remained consistent since 2010, despite a 50% decrease in opioid dispensing from clinicians.
Wait a minute. Prescriptions dropped in half, but prescription opioid deaths have remained constant? That ain't the flex you think it is, Harris. In fact, since 2010, opioid deaths have risen dramatically. Of course, that's when you include the illicitly manufactured variety. Anyway, nice of them to acknowledge that none of this worked and that prescription opioids aren't the driving force behind overdoses. All the misery, all the forced tapers, all the pharmacy refusals, all the arrests, all the civil suits, all the untreated pain, all the denial of care, all the suicides, and it was all for nothing. Thanks for going on record with that. Of course, they're taking the usual position of the authoritarian. It didn't work, so we need to do more of it. But I haven't even gotten to the really bad part yet.
Another important note to mention as well, in another clinical study among opioid users who transitioned to heroin or fentanyl, 83% stated that they started with medically prescribed opioids.
That is an outright lie. The paper they're talking about is The Effects of Opioid Policy Changes on Transitions from Prescription Opioids to Heroin, Fentanyl, and Injection Drug Use, a Qualitative Analysis, published in the July 2022 edition of the journal Substance Abuse Treatment Prevention and Policy. Okay, first lie. It's not a clinical study. From the study's methods section, we conducted 148 in-depth interviews with people who use prescription opioids non-medically, fentanyl, or heroin from a rural, urban, and suburban area in 3 states, Connecticut, Kentucky, and Wisconsin. Interviews with people who use opioids focused on how they initiated their opioid use and any transitions they made from PO use to heroin, fentanyl, or injection drug use. So first off, that's not a clinical study. That's interviews. It also wasn't about people who were prescribed opioids. It was specifically about people who use them non-medically. Now, remember her claim.
83% stated that they started with medically prescribed opioids.
Yeah, no, they didn't. Of the 148 participants, 134 said they started with some form of prescription opioid, regardless of whether or not it was prescribed. Of those 134, 111 later transitioned to heroin, fentanyl, or both. But only 64 said that the opioids they initially used had been prescribed to them by a doctor. That's 43%, not 83%. Also, by implication, she's making out like the study followed a representative group of pain patients and found that a whole bunch of them became addicts. No. As I pointed out, they started out looking specifically for non-medical users. They then asked them to backtrack and reconstruct their opioid histories. But even at that, those 64 aren't even established to have initially used them medically or as directed instead of starting out abusing them, or even if that was their purpose in seeking them out. All you have is a prescription being at the beginning of a long and complex opioid history out of people who were specifically selected as non-medical users without any sort of causation established. But listen to what the paper actually found. As more policies were passed to limit opioid prescribing, participants noticed that doctors were less likely to prescribe or refill POs. This led to scarcity of POs on the street, which accelerated the switch to heroin or fentanyl. These transitions likely increased risk of overdose and HIV/HCV infection. In other words, people who are already getting prescription opioids on the black market saw their supplies cut, so they had to switch to the illicit forms. In fact, the study concluded, a careful analysis of how and why people say they transition from PO to heroin or fentanyl reveals many unintended harms of policy changes to prevent overprescribing and diversion. Results highlight the importance of mitigating harms that resulted from policy changes. The exact opposite of what Harris claimed. And to make matters even worse, they're continuing to push this very same policy that resulted in these incredible harms to begin with. All at the behest of a pharmaceutical company trying to market a non-opioid pain medication that doesn't even work that well. This is lying, this is gaslighting, and this is absolutely a violation of every bit of medical ethics that exists. So all of that makes WellLink Health Alliance and Vertex Pharmaceuticals this week's
Biggest Bogon Emitter!
Are you looking for a new hosting provider? Have a new website you want to get going? To use the very hosting provider used by this podcast, go to hosting.bogosity.tv and you can sign up for many different hosting solutions, including shared hosting, WordPress hosting, reseller hosting, and even managed and unmanaged VPS and VDS hosting. And by using my link, you'll get $20 off and a free site migration. Enjoy fast, secure, and scalable web hosting with built-in automated backups and a unified control panel designed for flexibility and growth. They've made things incredibly easy with their AI website builder. Or go more advanced with their VPS hosting, giving you full root access to your choice of Linux OS. Let their experts take care of patches, performance tuning, security hardening, monitoring, and daily ops. All with responsive and knowledgeable support. Whatever your hosting needs are, you can find them at hosting.bogosity.tv. Hey, it's time to give out 2026's third Silver Cluon Award. A lot of times, this award is given out not so much for what is said, but who said it. In this case, it's both. None other than George Lucas slammed modern Hollywood and even gave a big nod to AI. In an interview with a Rabbit's Foot, he slammed Hollywood's over-reliance on focus groups. Quote, "I don't like focus groups. The audience doesn't know what they want to see. If they don't like a character, that's interesting, and as a filmmaker I want to find out why. But when the studios hear that, they take the wrong message. They let the audience actually make the movie. Of course, now they go crazy with that. Now it's all about what the fans think. That isn't how you make the movie. You make a movie by finding someone that knows how to make movies, that has a story to tell, and is passionate about it." Actually, it seems like it's just the opposite. They don't care what the fans think. It's what they want the fans to think. And any fan who doesn't think that way is a right-wing, sexist, Nazi transphobe. These focus groups are just people who want to see their pet politics on the screen, pulled from Hollywood's echo chamber. But that doesn't really go to why people want to go to movies in the first place. Quote, "You go to the movies because the stories move you emotionally. Art is an emotional medium. The critics and the fans who were 10 years old when they saw the first Star Wars and 13 when they saw the second one complained that they didn't want to see a children's film. Oh, that's terrible. Jar Jar Binks is terrible. Everyone said the same thing about R2-D2 and C-3PO. At the beginning, there was a huge push for me to get rid of C-3PO. And then in the third one, people said the same thing about Ewoks. What are you thinking? Get rid of those teddy bears. We want to see an adult movie." Well, it's a kids' movie. It's always been a kids' movie. He also had a lot to say about the elitist snubs of new technology. Quote, "I liked experimental films. I was into, and I still am into, the fact that moving pictures are moving, and that makes them different from paintings. So the mystery of it and the art of it is in the movement. But it needs to have emotion in it. You go to the movies because the stories move you emotionally. I have a lot of friends who are on the Film Foundation with me that's dedicated to saving old movies. And some of them say, I'll never do digital. Lawrence of Arabia was shot with film. And I say, no, it's cinema. It's the moving image. That's what it is. It's not a technology. It's an idea." And yes, that very much extends to AI. Quote, "Artificial intelligence means it's much easier for us to make movies. It's very much like sitting here saying, well, I believe the horse and the buggy is really where it's at. These cars, they break down, they need gas, there's all kinds of problems with them, and pretty soon they'll be making them into tanks, and then they'll be killing people. It's terrible. There's nothing you can do about it. That's progress. It's the future." It's just the kind of pushback Hollywood needs to hear right now. Quote, "If you like it, it's good. If you don't, it's bad. That's all there is to it. There's no, well, I've studied this and I am an expert. Art is an emotional medium, whether it's movies or plays or paintings. Steven Spielberg and I always agreed on that. What you're selling, in the end, is emotion." People don't go to films to be preached by snobs who think they're better than them. They go to films to be entertained. If you've got a message, then include it in the film in a way that speaks to the audience, not preaches them or talks down to them. Otherwise, you might as well take your message, shove it into a bottle, and throw it into the sea for all the good it'll do. So enjoy your shiny new silver Cluon, George, and don't worry, it won't tarnish, like what Disney has done with your legacy. And now let's transcendental interisophalogogicize this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
not even pretending anymore, are they? A New Jersey bill, A3968, would require any driverless robotaxi to be equipped with cameras plus 2 additional distinct sensor types, such as radar and LiDAR. Guess why? The bill would allow autonomous vehicles, provided they have at least 50,000 supervised miles with operators and triple sensor hardware, which of course would allow Waymo but not Tesla, as Teslas are vision only. That has nothing to do with safety. As we've covered, Tesla's vision only plus AI system is working like gangbusters and improving all the time. But instead of prioritizing safety and technology, which is based on results and not the specifics of the technology being used, they're specifically working to ban Tesla's full self-driving. This is going to affect anyone who wants to maintain their independence despite aging, or with disabilities, or in rural communities who will never be served by public transportation or even Waymo, or even simply people who want our roads to be safer. 94% of serious crashes are caused by human factors, impairment, distraction, fatigue, and so on. Cars represent freedom of movement, but that has always been limited when it comes to the elderly and disabled. Denying independent transportation options denies these people the same quality of life the rest enjoy. People in rural areas deserve that too, but they will never be served by public transport or taxis. Even Waymos and other LiDAR-based vehicles are limited to areas where they have up-to-date high-resolution maps pre-scanned into the system. How long do you think it's going to be before they scan rural areas? Will they ever? Whereas without these restrictions, Tesla and any other automaker who wants to take this approach can use vision-only AI systems at affordable consumer prices that don't need pre-scanned maps and can work anywhere, even in the remotest areas. Consumer-based robotaxi networks are the next generation's rideshare, where you can have your car go and make money for you while you sit at home doing something else. And the people you give rides to, elderly, disabled, poor, or even people who just don't want to fool with their own car, benefit greatly. Adoption is expected to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs that don't require college degrees and pay above median wages. It will likely engineer the next economic boom in a way that no one is expecting. And most of all, they'll make our streets safer, so the deaths from car accidents will one day be a thing of the past, a relic of a primitive bygone age. But not if politicians like the ones in New Jersey have their way. They care more about their cronies or their political narrative than they do about anything else. And they will sacrifice anyone and anything towards that end. So all of that makes New Jersey this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
Well, that wraps up this Check the Radar Range, Anything Yet edition of the Bogosity podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support, and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe to the Discord, Patreon, or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Oscar Wilde. Disobedience, in the eyes of anyone who has read history, is man's original virtue. It is through disobedience that progress has been made, through disobedience and through rebellion. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.